My acorn squash plants took a big hit at the end of the summer here in Zone 10B. One started losing leaves fast and the other barely grew at all. So I did some research and I think I finally figured out what went wrong. Welcome to the first video on this channel. My goal here is very simple. I want to learn how to grow my own food, and I want to share everything I'm learning along the way. I live in Zone 10B, which means heat, humidity, sudden rainstorms, and a growing season that never ends. It's the perfect environment for experimenting, making mistakes, and hopefully growing something worth eating. This channel will follow my progress with container gardening, seed starting, soil experiments, and the plant science behind everything I try. And today, we're starting with my acorn squash plants, because on day one, they already taught me a major lesson. These acorn squash plants actually started as a random experiment. I was making soup one day and decided to throw some in there, so I scooped out the seeds and threw them into some containers just to see what would happen. At the time I didn't record it, so I'm just gonna add some B-roll here, but honestly I wasn't expecting much. I just wanted to see if anything would sprout. After a couple weeks of growing, my plants were looking very nice, but unfortunately the week after we started to get a lot of rain here in Zone 10B, and that is the perfect condition for soaked soil that never dries out, and that's where the problems began. Here's what I started to notice. One of my plants, it was growing great. It was very tall, very long, but suddenly most of the leaves started to turn yellow and started to rot. And then the other plant, it almost didn't grow at all. It was very small. Both plants would stay soaked after each storm. At first I thought this was normal, end of season stress or something like that, but the decline was going very fast. One of the first things I learned was, in warm climates like 10B, 11A, roots need oxygen. If soil stays wet too long, roots begin to suffocate and then they rot. And I think this is what was happening to my plants. So I got a little more invested in my silly little experiment, and I really wanted to save these plants. That's when I started digging into some research. And the more I read, the more everything pointed to the same problem: root rot. What made it tricky is that each plant showed different symptoms. One was dropping leaves fast, and the other one was barely growing at all. But both signs came from the same source: too much water sitting around the roots for too long. When soil stays saturated, especially in warm humid climates like Zone 10B, oxygen can't reach the roots, and without oxygen, the roots weaken, decay, and become vulnerable to fungal pathogens. That's when root rot sets in. I found a really helpful video from Zen Garden on YouTube, and I want to give full credit. The method I used to diagnose and treat the roots came directly from that creator's instructions. So here's what I did to try to save both my plants. First, I let the soil dry out completely. Since the problem was too much water, I didn't want to treat the roots while they were still sitting in soaked soil. Once everything was dry, I mixed up a treatment that I learned from Zen Garden's video. It uses warm water, turmeric powder, milk, and Castile soap. I followed the measurements from the video and adjusted the amounts based on how much solution I needed for my container. I used two versions of the mix, one for the foliar spray and one for the soil drench. They're made from the same ingredients, but the ratios are slightly different. I'm honestly not sure how the ratio change matters, or if I could just use the same mix for both, but I followed the method as closely as I could. I soaked the soil just enough to wet the top 2 to 3 inches. Then after giving it some time to absorb, I sprayed the leaves with the foliar version of the mix. Once the plant had taken that in, I poured the soil drench version around the base of each plant so you could reach the roots. This whole experiment has definitely sparked my curiosity, so I think I will be continuing this. In the next video, I'm going to try my hand at starting seeds in a tray. It's something I've never done before. I'll also keep updating on the progress of these acorn squash plants, whether they recover or not. If you want to follow along as I learn and experiment here in Zone 10B, subscribe and stick around. Let's see what we can grow together.